Last year, we saw the highest economic growth of any G7 country. That was in 2022. In 2021, we also saw the highest economic growth, the highest GDP growth of any G7 country. So that's 2 years in a row with the highest growth in the G7. We've seen figures so far this year on GDP that have come in a little bit better than people had expected. On the question of unemployment, we've got unemployment which is mercifully almost the lowest level it's been for in my lifetime for nearly 50 years, 46 years. So that the unemployment figures, despite all of the difficulties with the war in Ukraine and everything else, are remarkably robust and better than many European countries. But there is a lot more work to do. That's why the Prime Minister is relentlessly focused on halving inflation, growing the economy and cutting debt.
Certainly a lot to do on all of those. But I wonder if we can kind of focus on your brief for part of our time this morning. Clearly, action is being taken by yourself and by the Home Office to ban machetes and those other knives, the zombie knives, which have no other purpose than no practical use, certainly. Explain the thinking behind this.
Well, I've been approached by quite a few MPs in recent months, pointing to constituency cases where people have been attacked using these terrible knives, which, as you say, have no practical use at all. They're either double-edged machetes or zombie knives with sort of shapes and protrusions, which means when somebody gets stabbed with them, they can cause very, very serious internal injuries. They're used to intimidate people in street muggings when criminals trying to take a Rolex watch or a mobile phone, and they're used in the context of inter-gang fights as well. So we think there's no reasonable use for these weapons. That's why we're taking steps today to ban them.
I suppose the question has to be, why has it taken this government 13 years to ban big knives?
Well, I mean, some of these knives were banned a few years ago. We do have amongst the strongest knife laws anywhere in the world. And since you mentioned the last 13 years, in the last 13 years, since 2010, violent crime has reduced by 38%, according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales.
Knife crime hasn't, which is rather more pertinent to what we're discussing today. Look at the figures. ONS data 2021-22 says there were more than 45,000 offences involving a sharp instrument or a knife. Now, that figure was 9% higher than the year before, but compared to 2010-11, it was 34% higher.
Well, I think some of those recent figures are because of the dip and then increase following COVID. Looking at the last 3 years, one of the best measures of what's happening with knife crime is looking at hospital admissions, where people are admitted into hospital with an injury caused by a sharp weapon. And over the last, I think, 3 years, for people under 25, which is a particularly concerning cohort, that's gone down by 24%. And as I say, overall violent crime down 38%, but there's a lot more to do. And it's one of the reasons why we're hiring more police officers. So figures that are going to come out next week, we hope, will confirm we're going to have more police officers than we've ever had at any time in this country's history.
I'll just reiterate that. The difference in the figures between 2010-11 and 2021-22, there were 34% more incidents of knife crime. I mean, this government clearly hasn't got a grip on it.
Well, I'd say overall violent crime has come down. We are taking action, either banning these knives today, we've taken action previously, we're going to have record police numbers, and overall violent crime has reduced. But there is more to do, and today's announcements are part of that work.
Can we talk a little bit about voter identification? We are in the run into the local elections, of course. Why are we making this change? Why are we demanding people show photo ID at polling stations when historically this country has never had a problem with voter impersonation?
Well, of course, one of the issues with voter impersonation is by definition, you don't know when it's happening. And when you can turn up to a polling station, as you currently can, and just say, my name is John Smith, and I live at number 10 Acacia Avenue, that's it. You just get given the polling card.
So presumably you've got lots of evidence.
And you vote. Well, as I just said, it's the kind of thing where, by definition, it doesn't get detected. Of course, there are plenty of times when ID is required for simple things, including collecting a parcel or, indeed, voting in a Labour Party parliamentary selection meeting. A number of other European countries have this requirement.
You don't need to have photo ID to be a candidate in these elections, but you need photo ID to vote in them.
Well, you've got to present information to the returning officer. You've got to get like 10 people to nominate you, for example. In fact, for parliamentary elections, it's probably more than 10. I forget the number. But the OSCE wrote a report on the 2010 general election recommending we take a look at this in Northern Ireland. The last Labour government introduced measures in 2003.
It's a different situation because of the sectarianism that takes place there. It's clearly markedly different. But if we look at the Electoral Commission data on all of this from 2022, there were 7 allegations of personation at polling stations. And in not one of them was there anywhere close to evidence for them to proceed with it. There haven't even been prosecutions, let alone convictions. So again, I ask why. On the one hand, you have the rights of 2 million people without photo ID potentially becoming disenfranchised, and you've got 7 allegations of personation in 2022, none of which resulted in a conviction.
Well, I think in order to have absolute confidence in the ballot, I think saying you need some form of ID in order to vote in person on the day is a reasonable thing to request. There are 20 forms of ID that are acceptable, and we found that I think 98% of people have one of those forms of ID, and for the 2% that don't, there is a free form of election ID, which they can apply for, and I believe well over 1,000 people a day have been applying for this in recent months.
Including me this morning. And I was rather surprised to find that through this process, all you need to do is insert your personal details, pop in your national insurance number and upload a photo. I mean, if that system is not capable of being... if fraud is not capable of being perpetrated through that system, then I don't know what is.
Well, I'm going to say, you had to put your national insurance number in. Now, clearly, to have a national insurance number, you've got to have gone through all kinds of processes, first of all, to get your national insurance number. Clearly, that NI number will have been checked against a government database. Now, that is very different to just turning up to a polling station saying, my name's Joe Bloggs, I live at number 10 High Street, and being able to vote, which is what you could do previously.
I completely understand that, but why then isn't a young person's rail card valid as a form of identification? For that, you need to show proof of identification. In fact, you need to show more proof of ID than I had to do this morning to get my voter authority.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. I think for the young persons, we've seen this example online of the young person's Oyster card, I think, compared to the over 60 Oyster card. And one is valid and one isn't. And the reason is the young person's Oyster card has much, much lower identification requirements than the over 60 one, which does require something like a passport or a driving licence. The young person's one does not require a national insurance number, for example, which you had to put in.
It does require proof of identification,
yeah, but not to the same standard as the over 60 one.
Look at what well in Scotland you have the pass that you can use there, but look at the list of passes. The Scottish National Entitlement Card, which entitles you to free transport on buses in Scotland if you're under a certain age. But look at the cards that are allowed to be used: the older person's bus pass, the disabled person's bus pass, the Oyster 60 Plus card, the Freedom Pass, the National Entitlement Card, the 60 and over Welsh concessionary travel card. All of these for older people. It does rather beg the question, is part of this not to do with the fact that if you are under the age of 25, you are far more likely to be voting Labour in the next coming elections?
Nonsense. I think the studies that were done showed that actually younger people were more likely to have, I mean, the figure's 98% overall, so, I mean, most people have one of these forms of ID, but I believe the study showed that younger people were more likely, even more likely, to have one of the various forms of ID than older people. So the point you're making, I think, is categorically not fair or accurate.
But just to reiterate this point, there are young people who have student identification that they've achieved through their local college or their university. There are young people who have their rail card where they've had to show proof of identification. These people have had to do more. They've had to do more than they have to do online through the voter authority system.
The study showed that the young people are more likely, despite what you said, young people are more likely to have one of the 20 forms of ID than older people. So your suggestion that somehow young people are going to be unfairly disadvantaged is categorically not true. If anything, it's the other way around. But the main point is that 98% of people already have one of these forms of ID.
That just means 2% of people might not be able to vote, though.
But they can apply for the free identification as you did, and hopefully you found the process was straightforward and easy.
Very easy, in fact.
There we are.
Good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
OK.